Thank you very much. And I have the pleasure of introducing Janet Sutherland. She has over 30 years experience in housing and regeneration in local government, housing associations, the voluntary and private sectors. Her work includes neighbourhood renewal, effective community engagement, urbanism and housing for older people, including published research. She's held senior positions with the London boroughs of Lewisham and Camden and was director JTP Cities. She is also vice chair of Peabody's Trust Care and Support Committee and a director of Groundwork South. And she's also on the Crouch End Neighbourhood Forum and the chair, most importantly, of this Future Lives group. And that's why she's here talking to us today. So Janet, over to you. We look forward to a very inspiring presentation.
Thank you very much, Harriet. Well, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. And thank you very much for zooming in today to engage in thinking about the contribution our homes can make to our future well-being. I hope that some of you have attended the first 3 talks of the Future Lives group. We're really pleased it's got off to such a good start. And we're aiming to inform and encourage as many u3a members as possible to take actions that will enable you all to live younger longer. I hope you'll gain some ideas today and be stimulated to do some planning that could improve your future quality of life. It becomes ever more important that we do whatever we can to prolong our independence as we grow older, which I'm sure you're all very aware of. And that's very much what Future Lives Group is all about. So I hope you'll gain, we aim to inform and encourage as many u3a members as possible to take action to live younger longer. I hope you've completed the housing questionnaire and that you found it helpful in considering how well your home may support you. Perhaps you might need to make some changes or even consider a move. I'm going to share with you today the results of the questionnaire, and we're really thrilled that so far nearly 6,000 u3a members across the country have filled it in. And you'll find it on the Future Lives webpage. The link will be shown in the chat box. So if you haven't already found it, you can find it there. Also, as Harriet said, please raise your questions in the chat below. We'll take as many of them as possible after my talk. I started this before doing the question. Well, I started the questionnaire with in my local u3a Crouch End in North London, and I gave a talk there on Zoom. And 91% of the people wanted to stay local. And very interestingly, 28% of them were interested in co-housing type schemes where people have their own home but live in an intentional community. And I'm going to give more information on that later. That level of local information might be enough to start to influence the choices of future housing provision in our area. Where I live, the council had recently sold the site behind the town hall for some flats. And if we'd known that level of interest in co-housing, we could quite possibly have persuaded the council to ensure that was included in the development proposal. So these, together we can really make some changes. In the UK, far fewer of us move in later years than in most comparable countries. We have far fewer choices and options, and we build remarkably little housing specifically for older people. Currently, less than 8,000 units of retirement housing a year, against an estimated need of 50,000 a year, and certainly 400,000 required by 2030. That's pretty staggering, the shortfall. In the UK, less than 10% of our homes are in retirement or sheltered schemes, compared to much more, about 13% Australia, New Zealand, about 17% in the USA. Interestingly, 25% of you have said that you're interested, that you'd like to live with older people, which suggests there's a demand for many more schemes than we have, if they're in the right place and at the right price. And another 75% of you want to live in multi-generational settings. Again, sadly, our house builders haven't been building what we want. They haven't been building to what's called lifetime home standard, which means a home with level entry, wider corridors, doors that can be adapted easily for use by a wheelchair user. And many new build homes can't easily be adapted, even putting in a stair rail, because the stud walls are too flimsy for it. Luckily, a recent change in building regulations will require them to improve what they build. But it's too little too late. And also, many house builders don't yet see the advantage of attracting right sizes to their new housing developments, which are often on the outskirts of towns and requiring a car. So the hunt for a suitable home is much more difficult than it should be. Currently in the UK, we've about 11 million people aged over 65. And I'm sure you all know that the proportion of us, of older people, as the population is rising rapidly. So we're expected to be 17 million over 65s by 2040. And that could be more than a quarter of the population in many areas. I'm sure you're all aware of the problems in our care system. Serious staff shortages, difficulties and high cost, and arranging care either in the home or a move to a care home for those that require it. We urgently need more options to support our independence for as long as possible. How do we minimise the chance that we might need to move to a care home? Of those completing the questionnaire who answered the questionation, if you move home, where to? Only 1% said care home. But I'm not for a moment suggesting we should all move. Many of you will be living in homes perfectly suited to your changing needs, perhaps with some adaptations and improvements, which many of you have already done. And these have a key role to play in helping people stay independent for as long as possible. If we need to make changes to our homes, where do we get good advice and find reliable builders? We're planning to provide more information on this later in the year in another Future Live session, and we'll be interested to learn of changes that you have made. Indeed, we'll never build enough new homes for all of us who would like to move, so please don't feel guilty if you want to stay put. We know that where we live, our home and our neighbourhood, can have an immense impact on our health and well-being. And the best homes can add several good years of independent living. What can we do to achieve this? The opportunities and choices available to us will vary hugely according to where we live and whether we're owners or tenants of our homes, what we can afford. But across all price ranges and tenures, we need a much wider range of options. The u3a members who completed the questionnaire are overwhelmingly homeowners, 94% of you. That's much higher than the national average. 80% of the over 65s nationally own their own home outright. Again, that's a much higher percentage of ownership than we're ever going to see in the future. And it means that collectively we can have a voice. There's about £1.5 trillion worth of housing equity held by over 65s in the UK. So let's all help achieve a wider range of housing options. I asked you to consider in the housing questionnaire, I asked you to consider your current home before completing the questionnaire and think how well it would support your independence in the years ahead, or whether you needed to make changes to, and if so, what. And so effectively to do a personal housing action plan, to make your plan for yourself. Many of you have already made changes to your home. Others know you will need to or are planning to. And sometimes simple changes can make a big difference. So decide what you're going to do. And when you're going to do it. Will you stay and adapt the home? Perhaps you'll have a home share, and I'll come on to talk about that later, or move in with your family. And if you want to move, when would you do so? And would it be to general or specialist housing? And what are the realistic options for moving? Would you stay in the area or move elsewhere? And who's going to help you move? The housing survey we started it in September 20, but it really took off after the Express newsletter and in the summer. And by this December, we'd had nearly 6,000 responses, which is just fantastic. Big regional spread of responses. As you can see, mostly southeast, and then the east, southwest, London, East Midlands, and so on down the line. We even had one response from the Isles of Scilly. And the detailed analysis shows some variation in each individual response across the regions, but it's not usually too great. 37% of you have already moved. And 63% not. And interestingly, 48% of us plan to stay in our currently home. This presumably includes the 37% who've already moved. 8% don't plan to stay in their current home. So this together, this is a really interesting result. Other research suggests that apparently a third of us would consider a move if there were attractive, affordable options. Yet a third of us have already moved. And 44% say we may need to move later. So this raises questions for me. Do more u3a members move than the general public? Or maybe just those who answered the questionnaire? I think we'll need to do some further probing to discover if there was a kind of bias that people who filled in the questionnaire were those particularly interested in the topic. But as it stands, these statistics are really quite interesting and will enable us to have conversations with people because they add to what we currently know about people's wishes. We asked how many of you have plans to change your current home, to make changes to your current home so that you can remain there. And of course, many of you have already made changes, and I now regret that we didn't have a specific question on that. Many of you have told us of changes you've made, but we might have got more had we asked the question. Of those who told us they had plans to make changes, the 27% who said they had planned to make changes, the number of responses here was less, because obviously it was just the people who made changes. So it's 1,700 compared to the over 5,500 of other ones. 37% said they'd be easy to do, 44% possible but not easy, and 19% significant. We then asked what kind of changes, and the most popular ones were having a downstairs toilet, shower, wet room or bedroom, ground floor adaptations, extending the house, converting it, creating extra rooms, stair lift, floor lift, easier, smaller garden. Lots of gardens are very important to you, but quite a few of you wanted more manageable gardens. And then the more simple things like shower seat, handrails, ramps. Obviously, 5% of you told us in this answer that you'd already converted or moved to suitable accommodation. We know many more of you who've done that. Only 1% mentioned decluttering. I will come on to that later. And we asked you what sort of, what kind of setting, and 25% of you, as I mentioned earlier, want to live with older people, and 75% to live in a multi-generational setting. And then we asked, if you move, what would you move to? Houses, mostly with gardens, was the most popular. That's 35% combining house with gardens and houses. And flats combined with flat with garden is 14%. And then 5% wanted bungalows. I know some other surveys have come up with a higher proportion of bungalows. And here we've got 23% wanted housing with older people, sheltered and so on. But then a further 8% who want co-housing or cooperative housing with older people, plus 6% who want co-housing or cooperative housing of multi-generational. Now that together makes 14% interest in co-housing cooperative solutions, down quite a lot from when I asked my local people in Crouch End. I don't quite know why, but still really significant, because it's, I don't know how many people know a lot about these options. They're very popular in many other countries. If you went to Zurich, you'd find half the people live in co-ops, similar with Copenhagen. Lots of co-housing schemes in Scandinavia and in America, but not so many here, although there's clearly a huge demand, and I will come on to that later. Only 1% said care home, but I don't think it's something most of us aspire to. It's something that we might need, but if we can keep out of it, so much the better. And your age range is interesting. Most of us who responded are in our 70s, between 75 and 75 to 80, but we've also got a wide spread, some under 65s and 6% of over 85s filling in the questionnaire. And then some other findings. I've not put up too many slides, so I'm just summarising some of the other findings. As I mentioned, 94% of you are homeowners, which is really quite unique, and it shows the demographic of the u3a. 68% of you want to remain in your local area. We're almost equally split between people who live as a couple and those who live alone. 49% in couples, 46% alone. 4% of you are living within a family. The vast majority of you think access to a garden or a communal outside space is very important. And this is something that actually a lot of house builders with their inner city flats and so on just aren't taking account of. Now, when you filled in the survey, 82% of you thought you'd have the financial means to achieve what you want, which is fantastic, while 6% said they wouldn't, and many of the remainder had concerns. It may be that some of you filled this questionnaire in before the current, well, before the truss disaster that shook the country, and I think there may be that we would now have a slightly higher proportion of people concerned. So, as I said, some of you have already had work carried out, such as making a new side entrance that changed the design of patio, removed steps, grab rails. Lots of you have converted garages into what might now be a craft room or an office, but can become a bedroom when needed, with ensuite facilities, shower room and so on. And obviously stair rails, stair lifts and so on are very popular. So let's now consider options to move. If people are going to make a planned move, they usually do it in their 60s or early 70s. If we leave it longer, the decision becomes more emotionally complex, and so it's put off. And then in later years, sometimes the move becomes urgent, perhaps after a bereavement or an accident. Without the time to plan, some people then move into care homes who may not have needed to, had they lived in a home that supported their independence. Most of you want to stay local, and town or village centres are ideal locations for us, for housing us in retirement, perhaps repurposing some existing buildings such as retail. I'm using myself as an example because I downsized during lockdown. I had decided I should move by around age 70, as I knew it does get harder to make decisions as we grow older. I loved my large family home and my very large garden, full of memories as my family and late husband as they grew up. But it was drafty and rarely full of people staying. Needed quite a bit of money spending on it, threadbare carpets that needed replacing, windows that time to double glaze, but that's a lot of money. And so it seemed a good time to move. It took me ages to find a property that met my criteria. I wanted to stay in the same neighbourhood, in a mixed multi-generational setting, down the hill. I looked at some flats, but I ended up with a smaller house. I saw an advantage in remaining a freeholder. My criteria were near shops, bus, park, amenities, with level access, large, sunny and bright kitchen diner, as you can see, so all the family can visit and eat together, small south-facing garden, downstairs toilet and room for a wet room, if later I live on the ground floor, and a separate living room that can become a bedroom if needed. I imagined moving around on a Zimmer frame, so I needed space to manoeuvre. The estate agents were amused that I bought a tape measure to viewings to ensure the staircase was wide enough for a stair lift if needed later, and a lot of them in Victorian houses aren't. My top bedroom with ensuite will be attractive for a live-in house share or carer if I need that at a later stage. Meanwhile, the stairs are giving me good exercise, running up and down. I hope that I'll be able to live here for many years, but recognise I may need to leave later if I become too frail. Decluttering was awful, very stressful, especially as I moved during lockdown. Initially, all the auction houses and charity shops were closed. You can tell that because that big wardrobe in the corner was my late father's gentleman's wardrobe, and it would have gone to an auction if they'd been open. As it is, it fits quite neatly there, and it's good storage, but it's probably not the quite thing for my modern kitchen. Luckily, things went very quickly from my front wall, and before I moved, I was able to take carloads of books and so on to charity shops. For me, the hardest part was going through boxes of family papers. I'd got things from my parents' house that had been in the attic for 30 years unlooked at, and throwing out children's artwork and so on. I wished I'd done it sooner, and actually I do urge all of you, when you're coming to this, if possible, start the decluttering before you're trying to make the move, because doing the two at the same time is very stressful, and anything we can do to reduce the stress is worth doing. I've spoken to several u3a members about moves they've made, and I'm going to give you a few examples to demonstrate some of the range of options. There's a new neighbourhood in North London, which is a mixed new local development, houses and flats. It's on an old hospital site, so it's got a very attractive setting with some old buildings and some new. One u3a member who moved there to a new house liked the low energy aspects of the scheme. There were, however, features which were more important to her, such as location, very near the shops, the design of development and the design of her house. She says, although the development has an age proviso for some of the flats, some are for over 50s, it doesn't have the feel of an old folks' home, plenty of families, children and younger people around. Another member, who moved to a spacious flat, enjoys participating in the activities available, living in a large mixed-use community, such as, and with a good communal feeling. She mentioned some relief at being free of some of the practical aspects of being a homeowner, although now having to deal with a large freeholder. And some of the houses there have got very manageable, smaller gardens. Another u3a member built a small new build on the garage site that was adjoining next to their family house, and then sold the house. You can see the flank wall of the old house in the picture. She says, I'm enjoying the new house. It has many advantages, including good insulation, low energy bills, our own front door, no one living above or below us, remaining in the neighbourhood and still having all of our good social networks and local support. It's given us the opportunity to put in high-tech smart devices, which would be difficult to retrofit into a house. So in terms of security and remote controlling of temperature and lights, this is very handy. It's also good, we had a good clear out and the downsizing is behind us, and we had time to do it while the building works were underway. I still feel that utilising small pockets of land or derelict garages is a good way to diversify the range of housing stock in an area. However, the process of achieving this has been quite brutal. I'm not sure we would do it again. Unfortunately, this is down to a not in my backyard mentality of some neighbours. She had quite a lot of, one particular, anyway, she had some opposition from neighbours. Here's a couple of other examples of garage new builds. And then moving on to community-led housing initiatives, which 14% of you have expressed interest in. They come in many, they're growing in popularity, and there's a considerable range of options. You might hear the phrases co-housing, collaborative or intentional communities, co-production, and housing cooperatives. In the UK, we lag behind many other countries in developing these, yet in many countries, they're hugely popular with all ages and can have particular advantages for those who may now be without children or on their own. In co-housing, homes are designed by or for the people who are going to live in them. One said, it's people-powered housing, getting people to think about what's best for them and their community, as opposed to being passive recipients. Residents will be encouraged to become involved with the local community. And the community aspect of co-housing is a potential cure for the loneliness epidemic sweeping the UK. The number of people living alone surpassed 8 million in 2018, and it's projected to rise further. And there's evidence to suggest that living alone can have an impact on health. Moving on to New Ground in Barnet, which is the country's first senior co-housing community in Britain. It's an intentional community by women for women over 50. Most other co-housing schemes are mixed age. New Ground offers private apartments with common living space, gardens, shared meals, parties, social events and trips. It's not in any way sheltered housing nor a gated retirement community. It's a development of over 25 self-contained flats plus a common room, guest room, laundry, and very attractive gardens. 17 of the flats are owned by their occupants, and 8 are for social renters, managed by a housing association. The group of women, when it started, were aged from early 50s to late 80s, and it's designed to lifetime homes and lifetime neighbourhood standards. And as you can see, it has very generous community garden, plus each flat has a private space, this photo was taken during lockdown. It enabled people to maintain social connection whilst social distancing, which was very handy and gave a lot of support to them. There are several new co-housing schemes being developed now, but not yet anything like as many as people want to see. Maybe you could get one going in your area. As there is considerable interest, we could do a webinar on this later in the year and give you more information and ways to get involved and get one going near you. Moving on to other retirement housing options. Retirement housing with low support, you'll all have heard of McCarthy & Stone. They're one of the biggest providers, mostly of low-level support retirement housing schemes, but they also have some with live-in care. And this example is in the north of England, and we have a u3a member living there. This isn't her living room. I got this off Rightmove. It's a flat in the development that's currently for sale, or may have been sold. She says that her family home needed work doing to it, and the large garden was going to become too much. And as she was on the outskirts of town, she needed her car. She wanted to stay in her small market town with all her friends, so she looked first at private apartments, but they had no lift. McCarthy & Stone were doing a new development in the centre, by the river, as you can see, lovely setting, and only 5 minutes from M&S. She found it expensive for the size of flat, but the process was very straightforward. She hadn't found a buyer for her house, so she did a part exchange with McCarthy & Stone. And they included conveyancing in the sale price, and she found the whole process very straightforward. McCarthy Stone had much experience in helping with every stage, including decluttering if needed. Her scheme is 55 flats with a common room, but no other facilities. A daytime manager is present. Residents have quiz nights, board games, and social activities. It's an easy place to live, she says, with pleasant gardens. She feels very safe and secure. She says the downside is this, as an older person scheme, there may be ambulance in the car park, people needing to go to hospital, and worries that it might lose value. Moving on to other forms of specialist housing, there's a range of specialist retirement housing with support, and there's evidence that that can help older people stay healthier for longer and can delay or reduce the need for social care, can take the stress out of later living. Whilst in the past, specialist housing for older people was mainly thought of as sheltered housing or care homes, we now have a much wider range, although options are not to be found everywhere. And they can be expensive, especially the ongoing service charges. When people move to retirement housing schemes, they release a family home for a new generation. And this actually really is a win-win situation because we have such a shortage of new family homes, which is pushing up the price of them. So the more we build retirement housing to meet people's needs, the more we reduce family homes, it's a benefit for everybody. In extra care housing, you have your own flat and care provision. And this example in the picture here is one by the Extra Care Charitable Trust, with lots of communal activities. There are then retirement villages, purpose-built homes in a community setting, separate homes with community facilities and care if needed, and some of them include 24/7, i.e. permanent staffing. Might be in a retirement village, such as ones provided, the examples I'm giving here, inspired villages where you can rent or own or rent your home, or Audley, who are a luxury provider. And the scheme here, Scarcroft near Leeds, has swimming pool and all kinds of facilities, restaurant, gym, and so on. And the service charge covers this, plus the care costs. About 20% of these retirement schemes also offer nursing care if needed. As 25% of you responding to the questionnaire expressed an interest in retirement housing, again, we can run a session later in the year with more information on the options, which I think some of you might enjoy. There's also something that not many people know about, which is shared ownership for older people. The schemes to date have been mostly provided by housing associations. McCartney and Stone have been doing some, but it can be quite a complicated scheme, particularly because if you purchase 75% of it, you don't pay any rent on the remaining 25%, but you need to know that, and having really good legal advice is very important. There's been a recent publication which recommends changes, which I really hope the government will take account of, because we have this option to part own and part rent your home. It should be much more. There should be much more. It should be expanding much more rapidly, because a lot of people, many people, are in the so-called squeezed middle. They've got some housing equity, but not enough to buy the home they want in the area they want. And an awful lot of people are in this. I mean, you look at the cost of some of these new, beautiful retirement homes, and they might cost more than you have value in your current home. So options to help you bridge that gap are very welcome. If these recommendations are adopted in how the older person's shared ownership scheme, they could make it of real interest to more people. As I said, you need good legal advice to understand what you're looking at with these options. But if there's interest, we can provide more information on it later in the year. These two examples here, I've just got off the internet. They're both with Housing Association, who are the main providers of it. Oh, sorry, I wasn't quite ready to move on to that slide. Let me move back again. There's the sharing your home with a home sharer is another option. I haven't got a slide on this. You offer a room to someone for either very little or no rent, who'll provide you with some companionship but not care. This is best done through an accredited agency who will protect your interests. Often it's a younger person needing somewhere affordable to live, perhaps for a year or so. But one u3a member has set up a very interesting model in Gloucestershire and Worcestershire, where the homeowner invites someone of a similar age to share their home, to give each other support and companionship. So this is seen as a semi-permanent arrangement, as long as it suits you both. The agency provides ongoing support, and it might be somebody who's previously lived in the private rented sector and can no longer afford the rent there. And this is going to be a really growing problem. I mean, we've now got, well, nationally, 80% of over 65s owning their home. But if you look at the 50, 40-year-olds, the proportion is much lower. And as they reach retirement age, many of them will be living in the private rented sector. And we need a whole range of options that they can afford, because if they're not homeowners, at the moment, their options are extremely limited. So something like this home sharer thing, where somebody coming out of the private rented sector provides companionship to a homeowner, could be of growing interest. In this area, the referrals might be through the scheme in Gloucestershire and Worcestershire that I mentioned. They're getting referrals through Age UK, but increasingly GPs are using the social prescribing role that they now have. That they now have. And one GP has 200 older people on their books who are lonely and potentially interested in this kind of arrangement. So I think it's something that hopefully we might see more interest in. And again, hopefully we're hoping that our webpage, Future Lives webpage, will become a source of information for you, a place to go to get information, and we can provide more information on home share and where to go for advice if you're interested on the webpage. Decluttering. This slide, sadly, I took this picture, some people who, it was their kids who desperately needed them to move for health reasons close to them, but they took the whole house with them. And as you can see, there wasn't much room to move. If you do some decluttering, even if you're going to stay in your own home, don't have it remaining full of all the things you no longer use that you don't need anymore. If possible, do the decluttering bit by bit, stage by stage, so it's not too big a process. I do urge you to do it. And so to conclude, let's be actively engaged citizens. Let's all be involved in making the case for what we want. Collectively, we can make a difference, encourage policymakers and developers to provide it. Across all tenures, the problem remains that many older people are currently not living in homes suitable for their needs. So we must make it possible to improve the condition and energy efficiency of the current housing stock so that older people living in their homes are safe, warm and well. How can we make it easier and affordable to do the improvements and adaptations we need for our homes? What ideas do you have? What help should the government give? How does it link to the urgent need to improve thermal efficiency?
Thank you, Janet. That was fantastic. Very informative. I've had a lot of questions come through, which is great. But it's great to see that you, Janet, are such a shining example and walking the talk, not just talking. So we've got lots of questions around the co-housing and sort of cost and funding and decluttering. I think I might start with the ones around co-housing. So you did address what cooperative housing is, so that's great. There was a local to you in Crouch End, apparently, co-housing scheme called Co-Housing Woodside, which after some years failed in 2017. So Angela's interested to know how it can be more successful, co-housing schemes.
Well, yes, in fact, the pictures I showed of the North London scheme of houses and flats, that was the Woodside development, which was on an old hospital site. And it was done with Hanover Housing Association, and they did new ground in Barnet. And their chair at the time was Lord Richard Best, who some of you may know, who currently chairs the APPG on older people's housing. And he's a passionate, he was involved with a thing called the Happy Report, which is Housing Older People's Innovation Scheme. Very interested in design of older people's housing. They wanted to do several co-housing schemes. What happened at Woodside was, and it's a problem we have in this country compared to some of the countries where it's more popular, there was a group of people who'd spent several years and quite a lot of money being founder members of this co-housing scheme, which was going to be the over 50s flats in that development. But the flats were being marketed by Savills, and they didn't know the price they would need to pay for these flats until shortly before they were completed. Suddenly, the prices had shot up, and they were a third more than they'd been expecting. So all but 8 people had to drop out, and that meant that the co-housing scheme didn't proceed. It became flats, over 55 flats, but just as an ordinary scheme. And I think this raises some of the questions about we need to make things more straightforward. If you were in Germany, you'd probably form a group of people who would buy the land before you'd know your outturn costs much more precisely. And also that because our planning process is so slow, I mean, new ground in Barnet, it took from starting to look for a plot of land to moving in to the scheme they got. They weren't all from Barnet, they were from all over London, so it was a bit difficult for them to get local authorities to support them. But it took 8 years, and we need to get better at this. And a lot of work's going on at the moment to try and make it more straightforward. But the sad reality is that there's a lot of barriers in the way to forming a co-housing scheme, and I think there's ways that we can get around it. Ownership of the land through anyway, I won't go into all the details, but there's a fantastic co-housing movement, and it can be linked into ownership of the land collectively and various other things. So there's people working on making it more straightforward. So please, if you're interested in co-housing, join the movement. Let's get it more straightforward. Let's make sure we don't have a failure like we had at Woodside again.
And there's lots of people asking for more information, Janet. So we'll make sure we put more information up on our website about co-housing and all those great resources. Well,
and I think if there's enough interest, certainly with the 14% of our respondents, I think there might be enough people interested in us running a session specifically on co-housing, where we can get people who are living in it, people who are trying to do it, to talk about what's involved. And we could have a map of England showing where the current schemes are and where the proposed schemes are, to give people more information.
Fantastic. And someone said that one resident of a over 60s apartment who I was talking to in a hospital appointment was concerned that all the residents were getting older and couldn't help each other as much. So that's probably one of the issues around co-housing.
It's an issue for specific age schemes. And I with New Ground, when they moved in, they were between 50 and 80. They've now been there, I can't remember how many years, 6, 7 years or something maybe. And, you know, one of the founder members has just died in her 90s. But it's really important that you're able to bring in younger people, because that obviously that is one of the disadvantages. If everybody is growing older together, you can become less attractive to younger people thinking of moving into the scheme. So maintaining that age range is a challenge, but it's very important, because they're not designed to become you know, that they're intended to be a place where people are able to give mutual support, not where, you know, they're predominantly at the frailest age. So yes, a challenge. One of the advantages of multi-generational living.
Absolutely. Someone specifically asked about, do you have any more details about the Gloucestershire, Worcestershire scheme?
I do. I'm not sure if I mean, it may be that we can put a link to this, to some details for it on the on our webpage. Right. It obviously at the moment it is still quite a small scheme, but it's attracting. It's only been set up since the summer really, but it's attracting quite a lot of interest. And I talked about homeowners offering space to people from the private rented sector, but obviously that's not the only thing. And in fact, one of the really early ones they got two women who didn't know each other, who both lived in the private rented sector. They both had incredibly similar backgrounds. They were able to get a local authority flat that they're now both living in, and they're just getting on like a house on fire. I mean, they had so much in common. It's a complete success story. So I think there's a lot of there can be more interest in this kind of thing, and it can be mutually beneficial. So we'll certainly put a link on the webpage to that.
Great. And Janet, there were some questions about sort of cost and funding. So a comment around McCarthy and Stone obviously can be cheaper if you buy it secondhand, not new. And then are retirement villages with all their facilities worth it with their high management costs? Simon wants to know.
Well, Simon, it depends whether you can afford it and whether it's going to provide you what you want. I mean, obviously some of the top end retirement villages are pricey, but a lot of people who live there are absolutely thrilled with the quality of life it gives them. I mean, we all want different things. Sometimes it seemed to me that people who like cruises for their holidays, you know, might like to live in a retirement village. Other people think that's not really what I want. That's not really for me. But lots of people find the range of facilities and all the people that you meet, the kind of sociability of it. There's restaurants and some of them, swimming pools, gyms, craft rooms, you know, some of the ones I visited. You can do a whole range of different activities, and certainly they can keep you fit and healthy. Extracare Charitable Trusts have a wonderful video showing what they do. That's got these octogenarians down in Wales. There's a kind of outward bound centre that was set up for people with serious physical disabilities, and they've got these kind of mid-80s grannies scooping through the trees on the, you know, those what do you call them, those whizzy I can't remember what they're called, you know, slides going through from one tree to the other, swings, looking having the time of their lives. So they can certainly provide for some people exactly what they want, and they've got the evidence to prove the benefits to health that they can bring, but they're not for everybody and they can be expensive.
Thank you. And Margaret made a comment, you might not want to tie up more money, you might want to spend it. And Bernie, I'll just put out a couple here, is talking about stamp duty. So it's likely that there will be any changes to, is it likely that there will be any changes to stamp duty rates to encourage downsizing, which will free up larger family homes, but not so prohibitive for buying?
There's quite a lot of people in the sector. And certainly, I was actually at a launch with Lord Richard Best, who I mentioned just last week, of this older people's shared ownership report, which has got all these recommendations. And one of those recommendations is that the stamp duty for downsizers should be the same as it is for first-time buyers. And quite a lot of people are saying there should be. I mean, other people obviously say, but you know, you've already got your home. Do you really need it? Compared to people who are struggling to get on the housing ladder. But there's a lot of people arguing that there should be stamp duty benefits for downsizers to give them a tax incentive to downsize or right size. I prefer the word right size because not everybody wants to go to somebody smaller. Sometimes it's just something that supports you in a more efficient way.
Thanks, Janet. We'll move on to a bit of decluttering now. So someone mentioned that there was a declutter chat on the u3a Facebook Keeping in Touch page, which is interesting. We should check that out. But another question around, well, specifically about decluttering, how best to get rid of previously valuable antiques, such as large brown furniture, without losing a fortune.
Well, the problem with large brown furniture is nobody wants it.
Yes.
Which is one of the reasons why, because it's beautifully made, my dad's cupboard. It's got the most extraordinary internal oak shelving and so on and so forth. It's actually, I mean, when I first moved here, I thought, no, I'm not keeping that. And it came temporarily until I could sell it at an auction. But then when I realized that it was actually, it fitted, and it's quite useful storage space. So I've got used to it. But no, auctions, I mean, auctions are the best way to get to rehome things like that, or this free cycle. There's various other ways, but you won't always get the value that you think it has because fashions change and what people want. Apparently dark wood furniture is coming back into fashion, so hang on to it for a bit.
Hold on to it. Now, Stephen says the pictures on the slides were all of flats, so why don't bungalows get built anymore? Surely some older people could afford one.
Sorry, I should have included a picture of a bungalow. I think the problem with bungalows is they need a lot of land, and land is so valuable these days that you know, any house builder is loath to build. I mean, if you look at what house builders build, the footprint of the individual houses is tiny. They're these narrow little things, so they can fit more houses on a given plot of land. And the main problem with bungalows is the land value. That's the main problem. So they do become increasingly hard to live unless you're in an area where there are strict planning rules, or maybe you already own the land and you can build it. But no, bungalows. I mean, I was interested that 5% of people are interested in bungalows because some other surveys, I looked at one just the other week where the proportion of people interested in bungalows was much higher. I think it depends a bit what part of the country you're in, but obviously we had a good geographic spread of our respondees. So sorry, I should have put in a picture of a bungalow, and I did put in some houses, but mostly on garage sites.
I'm sure you'll be forgiven. Now, Rose asks, there are lots of home improvements being carried out by government, but if you're not on benefits, you get no help. So she thinks this isn't fair and it should be available for all. What do you think? Well,
I think that, I mean, the government have improved, they have increased the amount of money that they put into disability grants called DFGs, Disabled Facility Grants. And obviously that is means tested, but it could be a charge that's added to your home. If you own the home, you need the works, but you don't have the money. it can be a charge that's added to your home, and so it's recouped when your home is sold. But it does require the local authority to be able to do that, and obviously they're under increasing pressure financially. But as far as, I mean, when a few years ago, some of you will remember, there were things called green energy grants, and of course it didn't work because it hadn't been set up properly, so the government got rid of it. But we hopefully soon we will have more grant-enabled ways to improve the thermal efficiency of our homes, because Britain's got the most thermally inefficient homes in the whole of Europe, and it's to my mind, it's just completely ridiculous. It would be a win-win to do a major program in the country. We'd be creating jobs, we'd be creating helping an industry get established, and we'd be stopping leaking all this CO2 out of our homes into the atmosphere and making us able to stay warm comfortably. So I do hope that soon we'll get back to that. But no, obviously at the moment it's a problem. And one of the things I'm hoping that we can do as a group is provide some information on the webpage. And again, I mentioned that we could run another session later this year to share ideas about value for money ways, improvements that people can do, because obviously some things cost an awful lot of money, but there can be some simpler things that can make quite a big difference. And I hope that we can help people find the way to finding that.
Yeah. So we've just got a few minutes left, Janet. I'll ask a couple more, but I think we'll just take a minute or so at the end just to talk about future events. Is that okay?
Of course.
So
can I just say to people, we won't have time to answer all of your questions because there's so many of you here today, but we will note all of the questions, and we will, we're going to keep a note of everything that's in the chat room. So we will look at the questions that you've asked, and as the Future Lives group, we'll make sure that we address them in one way or another.
Yeah, because someone said, that'd be a good idea to do a session on equity release. There's Melanie, and everyone wants to know this. It can be difficult to know when to move to a more age-appropriate home. When is the ideal time, if any, to make this decision?
Well, as I said during my talk, the majority of people, I mean, the best time really is before you need it. But then the problem obviously is, I mean, when I was considering, do I want a flat or a house? You don't want to. You want something that's age appropriate for you. I've still got, young grandchildren, lots of other things. So, but I've moved somewhere that hopefully will support me. If I'd been older, I probably would have gone to a flat, not a house. But we know that as people get into their 70s and late 70s, it does become more emotionally difficult to make decisions, and then you put it off. And sometimes you put it off too long, and then you end up breaking a hip, stuck in a hospital, unable to return home. So the sooner the better, really. But actually, my mother bought a sheltered flat off someone who'd moved far too young, and she could clean it in 10 minutes flat, didn't have anything to do all day. So she ended up selling it to Mum and buying herself a wee little house. So it's a question, it's a balance of what suits and what is for the future. But a lot of people do leave it too late.
Well, thank you so much, Janet. Lots of positive responses from people and lots of questions about more information. So as we said, we'll look at all the questions and put more information on the website, and it will inform our work going forward. Do you want to just sort of wind up by telling people a bit about what's coming up? I can share my slide if you like.
Yes, please do, Harriet. So the Future Lives group has got our next event on the 28th of February is going to be an open space event, which when we hope that that an open space event is a thing where we're going to break out into rooms on various themes. We want to know your views, what you'd like the Future Lives group to be looking at. How can we inspire, influence and inform u3a members to live their best possible future lives? And we're not going to be able to have as many as we have today at that, because it wouldn't be a properly interactive event if there were too many. So we'll probably need to limit it to roughly 100 people, but we'll have 5 breakout rooms where you can all have a good discussion. Then on Friday, the 24th of March at 2 o'clock, we've got David Sinclair, who's the Chief Executive of the International Longevity Centre. And he's going to talk to us about the future of aging. Hopefully they do some fabulous work, the International Longevity Centre. I'm a huge fan of what they do. And I hope many of you will be able to join us then. And then, sorry, it's a little bit close, the 4th of April after that, but then we've got Easter. Jeremy Porteous, some of you may have come across Jeremy. He's director of the Housing Learning and Improvement Network, the Housing LIN, which is a fantastic online resource. About 30,000 people or something enormous use it. It brings together housing, care and health. And he's going to be talking to us about some of the AI, some of the some of the artificial intelligence, how it can really help, some of the things that can really help improve our lives. And he'll also talk about other things that I hope will inspire us. So keep an eye on our webpage, which the link to that is on the bottom of this slide. And if you haven't already filled in the housing questionnaire, it's on that page. And it's a very new thing, the webpage, but we hope that it's going to grow and that you will find it a useful source to go to for information. So thank you all very much indeed for coming today. And I hope you found it useful, and I hope it will inspire you to not put off the decisions that you need to do to make sure your home enables you to stay independent for as long as possible. Thank you.